Liam Fox, a big figure of our politics, elected to be a Conservative Member of Parliament in 1992. That is 3 decades ago. My goodness. What have you done to deserve that?
I always said that being in any job more than 25 years was too long. And I never really intended to be still here, as it were. But the funny thing is, as a lot of your viewers will know, is 25 years comes a lot faster than you actually expect it to. And I still feel the drive to be there at the centre of political debate and public policy and international policy. It's not as though the problems have diminished in 30 years. And funnily enough, a former Cabinet Minister, Virginia Bottomley, said to me last night, "Why are you continuing at the next election?" And I said, because I think that one of the problems that we have is that we're losing our institutional memory. In Parliament, people are retiring too young. I think it's the same in government. I think it's the same in the civil service. And I think that, if you've got the experience, and you can say, well, don't try that because we tried it before and it didn't work, or the sort of thing I mean. And I think that matters. And I think that this idea that everybody sort of starts work later, everyone retires earlier, and expects to live longer, means that our working contribution gets smaller. And I don't think in things like politics that's really sensible. And I guess that comes a little bit from my medical background, when experience matters. There's a reason why we don't make our brightest young doctors consultants the next day. It's because they ought to learn the ropes. And I think in Parliament, one of the biggest differences, I think, from 30 years ago is that people get promoted very early on in their political careers before I think they get a real feel for how the political system works and for getting a knowledge base from which they will make the decisions.
So some people are promoted too early.
I think some people, I can think of people, you probably too from your time in the Commons can think of people who were just there too early and it wasn't good for them. They hadn't really matured into the role, and had they been given a bit more time, they might have had more successful political careers. So it's a lot about good man management, and in terms of how we manage personnel at Westminster and in government, it's not always the 5-star treatment, as you know.
So by the time you're elected to Parliament, that towering figure of your party, Margaret Thatcher, she's been deposed. John Major is your leader. Did you know Margaret Thatcher?
Yes. So I'd met her a number of times. When I was still working as a GP, she liked a political pamphlet that I had written, and I was asked to go into Downing Street and do a little bit of speech writing now and again. This was before I was elected. And she didn't really say very much that I ever wrote for her, but I've got one of the best collections of what Margaret Thatcher never said, if you're interested in having a look at it. In fact, what Margaret Thatcher didn't say is a lot better than what most politicians do say today. And I knew her then. After she stood down as leader, I remained close to her. So she was at our wedding. At one point, it was hard to know who the star was. And she was also at my 50th birthday party, which was only a few weeks before she died. And people were saying, she's too frail to come. And obviously she was. But and they said, well, she'll be there for maybe 20 minutes. That's what she'll manage. But bottle of champagne later, and she was back to, as best she could be at that time, her form. And she certainly was a towering figure. And I think what made her different from most politicians, I think, is her sheer courage, that she believed in a certain course that she thought was right and stuck to it. And even when the brickbats came thick and fast, and even when the polls dropped away, we weren't governed by focus groups in those days, but I'm sure they wouldn't have been positive. But she believed that what she was doing was right, and the personal hurt, which I think was there a lot of the time, she endured because she believed she was right. And it's a different sort of political environment from the one we find ourselves in today.
Well, you could say that. We've got a very recent example in your party, in our country, of someone who absolutely believed they were right. She lasted 44 days, Liz Truss.
Yeah. You also have to be competent. You also have to be right.
So you don't think she was?
No, I didn't support Liz Truss. And I think that, when you apply theory, irrespective of the circumstances of the time, you're not likely to end up in a very good position. I mean, the sorts of things that she was putting forward were perfectly reasonable propositions for an economy where the public finances were balanced, where there wasn't high inflation, and we had stalled growth. But it was not the right policies for an inflationary economy.
Your party has been through a bumpy ride, 3 prime ministers in as many months. That wasn't the case between, well, in the history of your party, but between 1992 and 1997, your party went through a bumpy ride of a different nature. Mm-hmm. Are there any parallels that you can see? You witnessed it as you were heading towards that landslide Labour victory. Do you see any historical parallels today after the bumpy ride your party suffered?
I do, but not with that period. I see it more like the run-up to 92, the 92 election. And you had a lot of things I think were similar. We'd been in office a similar length of time. We had a new leader, John Major, who was more popular than the party by quite a margin, similar to have with Rishi Sunak today. And the voters, I think, were disillusioned with the Conservatives, but they hadn't decided to move over to someone else. I think that came later with Blair.
Yeah.
And I feel from talking to voters, and after 30 years in a constituency, get to know pretty much what a lot of them think. And I get the feeling this is much more like the Parliament that led up to the 92 election.
Interesting.
I think that your point is correct, that I think after 92, after Black Wednesday, the public decided that they simply didn't want the same government. They had decided to make a change. I don't think they have at the moment. Interesting.
So you think the most likely scenario is a Conservative government with a smaller majority? Then?
I think that's not unlikely. I mean, if you're being objective about it, the government, with the boundary changes, is defending an even bigger majority than 80. That is a very hard number to lose in our political system. So I think that there is a good chance that you end up with a Conservative government with a smaller majority. But against that, I think, 2 years ago, would we believe that we'd be a war in Europe, that would have been through a pandemic, that we'd have had all this political turmoil? No, you wouldn't. So, if a week was once a long time in politics, it's now an eternity.
Now, you were a GP. You had a proper job. Lots of MPs don't, but that is definitely a proper job. So you will have had more experience in Parliament than most of the reality of working in the National Health Service and how it works. There's been a bit of a debate about if people don't turn up for their GP appointments, they should get fined. Do you have any truck with that argument?
I do. Only because of how difficult it would be to apply it. And the last thing we require is more bureaucracy in the NHS. I think the principle is reasonable, and I think that people do sometimes abuse a service that they perceive as being free. But it's not. I think medicine is a very good. People will say to me, as you're not exactly saying nor implying, but people will say, how could you go from medicine into politics if you've had all that training and understanding of the system? And I actually think there are too few people in Parliament who've done jobs outside. Frankly, I wouldn't allow people in my own party to be Conservative candidates if they hadn't done real jobs outside. The idea of going from university, working inside the system, and then being an MP, I think you lack intellectual nourishment.
I couldn't agree more, but you've said something quite profound there. You actually would stop people if you've gone to university, you've been a researcher, or you've worked, for an MP or worked at central office. That's it. You should go and get a real job before you come in here.
Well, I think if you want to govern a country, you should maybe give it the respect of knowing something about it and having worked in it. And people will say to me, oh, well, being all that time spent as a doctor, and then why would you want to go into politics? Well, I would actually think we need more people who've done those real jobs and understand what bed blocking means, that sort of thing. And also it gives you a different perspective. I mean, if a baby with a cord around its neck feels like a crisis, someone who has a cardiac arrest is a crisis. It's different from the day-to-day criticism you get in politics, which is an irritation. And frankly, there are some people, as again you'll recognise, there are some people who can't tell the difference. And A, their lives are miserable, and B, they don't take tough decisions because they don't understand what a real crisis feels like.
Really interesting. Gosh, I could talk to you about expand on so many of the things that you've said. I'm sorry that we're restricted on time. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Just want to check about a couple of views and about whether they have changed. So you're on record of being critical of our abortion laws. in 2001, you said that you said party members should pray that there would be a huge restriction, if not abolition, of our pro-abortion laws. Have you changed your mind?
No, I think our laws are far too liberal in the United Kingdom, and there are specific cases. And the most specific case was the one that was in court last week about Down syndrome. The fact that you can abort babies with Down syndrome right up to 40 weeks, I think, is absolutely horrendous. And we need to look at whether that's justifiable in any way, shape or form. So, we live in a country where that's going to be the law. So my view is we try to get it to what I regard as a much more acceptable level, looking around as other European countries, for example, on that. And I think that, of course, there are very difficult cases. And as somebody who worked for a short time in obstetrics, you see what those are. But I think to see abortion used effectively as a mechanism of birth control is just totally unacceptable.
Are you doing anything to change the law?
Well, I'm looking at the Down syndrome one in particular, of course, having taken the Down syndrome bill, now the Down Syndrome Act, through Parliament. I didn't want to tackle it in that piece of legislation because I thought it would have made it a very different type of bill and the debate would have been a very different debate. But it's a debate that we have to have.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to check if you have changed your views on is that you voted against same-sex marriage in 2013. Change your view?
Yeah, I mean, it's now an accepted thing that we have, and it's a debate that's behind us.
Right, so let's go a bit poppy now. So I remember this really clearly, but for people who didn't hear this, but it was a big Westminster sort of source of intrigue. It was like Liam Fox knows Natalie Imbruglia, Australian pop star, former Neighbour star. I mean, she was a big deal at the time when people were saying, yeah, Liam Fox, Natalie Imbruglia. And she even thanked you in the sleeve notes of her album, Left of the Middle. How did you get to know Natalie Imbruglia?
This is my claim to fame. Almost no one else I know has been on the cover notes of a #1 album. So she was a friend of mine. She worked as a producer, and Natalie was in her care at the time. And I'd never watched Neighbours, so I didn't know who she was. And
that's a scandal that you never watched Neighbours.
But one of my friends, who was a massive Neighbours fan, had a total crush on Natalie Imbruglia, and she had a very good sense of humour. And we knew he was going to be in a particular restaurant one night, and so Natalie and I had a table at the other part. And later on in the evening, she walked up to him and started to hug him and stuff in front of his friends, and it was classic. He's also now a member of Parliament, so you'll have to guess who that is.
Oh no, Liam! No,
Who is it?
I can't guess.
No.
No. Okay. You're still in touch with Natalie Imbruglia?
No, I'd lost touch quite a while ago. She had quite a lot of problems with illness with her husband. But I do still buy one or two of her records, so if she's watching, she does owe me for her income.
So enjoyed that. So enjoyed it. My only regret is that it wasn't longer. Fascinating. Liam Fox, thank you.
Pleasure.